This is the true story of Megan Newton, a driven and talented 18-year-old girl, a young woman that had already achieved so much and was ready to take on the world. But then, after entering her apartment one night, she would never walk out. So, what happened to Megan? Viewer discretion is advised for this educational documentary. Welcome back to CASE Documentaries. I bring you true crime, disturbing stories and other things that you may later regret knowing with regular uploads every week. Please do join the quickly growing, incredibly supportive CASE family by hitting subscribe now and turning on notifications. Remember, choosing to be kind can save a life in many ways. Thank you so much for choosing to be here with me. Our love and respect goes out to those that knew and loved Megan and everyone affected by this case. Megan Newton was a shining star in her community in Stoke-on-Trent in the West Midlands. At just 18 years old, she had already accomplished more than many in her lifetime. With an unwavering dedication to academics, sport and the community as a whole, she was also a well-rounded football player who stood out from the crowd. Her coach at Stoke Town Ladies said, "She loved life and she was a ball of energy, a force to be reckoned with." And a force she was. Her dreams were big, but she was determined to make them a reality. With her ambitious spirit and love for football, she dreamed about securing a scholarship to go and study in the United States. Her dream was to be the first of her family to go to university, and she intended to pursue a career in sports therapy. She had a genuine hunger for football coaching. She coached the Norton Wanderers under-7 side, and she was getting ready to undertake a Football Association coaching course. By all accounts, it seemed that Megan was well on her way to achieving her goals and ambitions. She was on course to leave a lasting impression on the world. But everything would change on the 19th of April 2019. It was a Friday. But not just a normal Friday, it was the start of the Easter weekend, and for 18-year-old Megan and her friends, that meant a bank holiday in the UK. Bank holidays in the UK are an excuse to go out with your friends and let your hair down, and this is exactly what Megan had every intention to do. Megan worked her shift at a local fish and chip shop in Trent Vale and finished just after 10 PM, but the late shift wasn't about to stop her night out. She headed straight home to freshen up and change into something more clubbing appropriate. She met up with her friends at around 11:30 PM, and as is the case with people of this age, for them, the night was still young, and the excitement was palpable. Megan and her friends hit the town first, stopping at a local bar to kick off the festivities. Glasses clinked and laughter filled the air as they toasted to the start of the Easter weekend. But the real festivities were just beginning. As the night went on and the party continued, the group made their way to a popular nightclub where they danced the night away. Megan was in high spirits, giggling, dancing, and proudly showing off her new tattoo. She was basking in the moment and living life to the fullest. The party eventually came to a halt at 2:20 AM. Not by choice, the clubs were all closing. Megan said goodbye to her friends and made her way to a nearby taxi rank so that she could catch a cab back home. Little did she know that this seemingly routine journey home would become a fateful turning point in her life. When Megan got to the taxi rank, there was already a long queue as other partygoers all seemed to have the same idea as her. Everyone just wanted to get home. Knowing that her wait would be a long one, she braced herself for a tedious wait while standing in line. Waiting for a ride, Megan ran into Joseph Trevor, an old friend from school. Well, friend was a stretch, more like acquaintance. They saw each other out and about on nights out and would say hello. Their shared love for football often sparked conversation between the two. Joe, as he was more commonly known, also seemed to have a bright future ahead of him. He was a semi-professional footballer. Trevor. He was the son of 2 police officers, and although his parents were strict, he had a normal upbringing and grew up in one of the most affluent parts of Stoke-on-Trent. He was in the process of studying for his A-levels, and he had already secured a scholarship to study at an American university. But it seems that, despite his promising future, his path was far from certain. Unlike Megan, he appeared to lack the drive and determination needed to succeed. He wasn't really willing to make the sacrifices needed to reach the very top. Despite his relatively comfortable life, he was prone to getting into trouble at school, and his illicit substance use was a constant source of concern. In fact, while standing in line with Megan that evening, he told her of the disastrous night that he'd had. He said that he was at the same nightclub as Megan and her friends, but he had been focusing on drinking excessively and indulging in illicit substances. It was at this nightclub that a bouncer caught him with a bag of ketamine, and this then resulted in a run-in with the police. Joe, however, was let off with a warning. He told Megan the last thing he wanted was to face his police officer parents at home while still under the influence. He told Megan that he was already in trouble with the police, and he didn't want to go home intoxicated and get into any more trouble with his parents. Desperate for a place to stay until he sobered up, Megan handed him her phone so that he could call some friends and find someone to help him out. However, none of his friends answered his calls. It seemed that Joe was now in a bit of a pickle. In a moment of compassion, she offered her couch as a refuge for the night, and Joe gratefully accepted. Little did she know that this act of kindness would spark a chain of events that would change everything. While in a cab on their way home, Joe actually received a text from his dad asking when he'd be returning home. At this point, Joe lied and said that he was staying over at a male friend's house. Megan and Joe are then seen walking on the side of the road on their way back to her flat. They eventually arrive at her apartment at around 4 a.m. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary. They are quite jovial as Megan tries to unlock her front door. Joseph can be seen standing behind her. He takes a quick glance to his left and to his right, almost as though he was scouting his surroundings, checking to see if anyone spotted him arriving home with Megan. Was this just a normal reaction, or was it an indication of the darkness that lay ahead? A few moments later, the door is unlocked and Megan enters her apartment, with Joe following closely behind. This is the last time that Megan is seen alive. On the morning of the 20th of April 2020, another resident at Megan's apartment building made a gruesome discovery. Whilst taking out the trash, they found Megan's apartment key and fob, stained with a reddy brown substance. In their building, you couldn't get in or out without a fob. If Megan's fob was in the trash, where was she? Alarmed by the sight, they raced to Megan's door. They pounded at it with urgency, desperate for a response. When the neighbours heard nothing back, they used the stained keys to gain access to the flat. There they were greeted with an even more gruesome discovery. The apartment was eerily quiet. In Megan's bedroom, they were confronted with an horrific image. She lay lifeless and unclothed on her bed. The multiple visible wounds suggested this wasn't an accident. Someone had ended the life of Megan Newton. When police arrived to investigate, they noted that there were no signs of forced entry. Megan must have known the attacker. She would have had to have let them in herself. And once she did, she was throttled, intimately violated, and jabbed a total of 9 times in her neck and back with a sharp implement from her own kitchen. Police immediately turned to the CCTV footage from her building. At first, it appears to be just a young couple coming home after a night of fun, but what lies beneath the surface is shrouded in darkness and deceit. As she fumbles her key and gleefully makes her way into her flat, she's closely followed by Joseph Trevor. Their mood appears to be happy and nothing is out of the ordinary. The two are seen entering the apartment shortly after 4 a.m. And then, less than 90 minutes later, Joseph is seen leaving the flat again. But this time, he's alone. His demeanor is calm and he appears relaxed. He's then seen exiting her apartment building and strolling through the parking lot. He goes to the nearby bins where he discards Megan's apartment key before leaving her complex. Footage from a nearby camera captures Joseph as he's walking down the street. At some point, he turns his hand to look at it, and the camera captures him with blood on his hand. Joseph here was quite literally caught red-handed. Joseph Trevor walked for another 15 minutes towards a bridge over the A500. This is a major dual carriageway in Stoke. Here he sits down at the edge of the bridge with his feet hanging over the road below. We can only guess the thoughts running through his head at this time. Was he reliving the last hour? Was he thinking about what had occurred within those four walls? Was he thinking about how he had thrown his scholarship, his life, away? He wasn't there long before catching the attention of a driver passing by. Alerted by the sight, the driver notified the authorities, who immediately rushed to the scene. The police apprehended Joseph and took him to the Heartlands Hospital to evaluate his mental state. They were determined to keep him from harm. After concluding that he was not a danger to himself, they called his father to take him home. Little did they know, they were releasing a cold-blooded killer. After reviewing the CCTV footage, police rushed to Joseph's home and brought him in for questioning. The evidence was already, frankly, damning. They just needed a confession. But that wasn't what they got. Joseph admitted to the police that he had been with Megan the previous evening, and he told them that they were consensually intimate before his memory went blank. He said that he didn't remember what happened after their relations, but that he was 100% certain that he hadn't attacked Megan. He wasn't a killer, he knew that much, but CCTV suggested otherwise. The police arrested Joseph Trevor for the killing of Megan Newton on the same day. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, Joseph Trevor remained steadfast in his claim of innocence. He intended to plead not guilty, forcing Megan's grieving parents to endure a full trial and prolong their suffering. After 10 months of gathering evidence, the state was ready to bring him to trial. They believed that he was responsible for the heinous crime involving Megan. Before proceedings could even begin, Joseph stood up in court. He shocked everyone in the room by declaring his guilt. The once defiant defendant now stood before the court ready to tell his version of events. He told the court that when he was 15 years old, he was accused of violating a 14-year-old girl. There were no charges and the matter never even went to trial, but the stigma followed him for years. He was bullied at school, nicknamed and Rolf Harris. By the way, just Google it at your discretion if you're not from the UK. And on the night of the crime, he ran into Megan in a taxi rank. The two had a brief conversation and Megan apologized to him. She told him that she was the one responsible for spreading these rumors around the school. He said that when Megan admitted this to him, it had brought up old demons. And it was ultimately this admission that drove him to murder. The prosecution, on the other hand, didn't believe a word of Joseph's version of events. There was nothing in Megan's character that suggested she would start those rumors. She had always been nice to him. The prosecution argued he wasn't triggered by a confession, but instead by rejection. They argued that when Megan invited Joe back to her place, it was purely platonic. She was being nice and he was in a sticky situation. He was having a bad night and he had nowhere else to go. Joseph's motives for going back to her place were for intimate relations, and he most likely tried to come onto her when they got back to her flat. When she rejected him, Joseph flew into a fit of rage. Joseph was used to getting what he wanted, but he couldn't have Megan. When she said no, he ended up throttling her for 15 to 30 seconds, and he ultimately jabbed at her with a sharp implement. This case was surely black and white. The judge agreed. He stated, "The attack on her was driven and motivated by your serious and violent conduct. You violated her. You went on to strangle her. You went on to arm yourself with an implement from the kitchen area and jabbed her no less than 9 times. There was no question of whether or not he was guilty, only of what his punishment would be. Joseph Trevor was sentenced to a minimum of 21 years and 65 days in jail before he could then be considered for parole. This means that he may be back out on the streets by the time he turns 40, a fact that Megan's parents find difficult to digest. No amount of time could ever bring their loving daughter back, but they believe the light sentence Trevor got is much too lenient for the heinous crime that he committed. Do you think the punishment fits the crime here? What do you think could be done to avoid something like this happening again in the future? Let me know down in the comments. Please do hit like if you appreciate what I'm doing here. Thank you to everyone in the Dark Case crew. You too can become a channel member for just 99p. A huge thank you to my patrons. Your support makes a huge difference. You too can support my work and be thanked in every video for just $5 per month. So a huge thank you to Rachel David, Kathy Green, David James, Adi Alexander, Karen Jones, El Palmieri, James Harrington, Shane Woodward, Faster River, Stacey Krogerus, Summer Chambers, Mona Corona, Cepheid Variable, Anthony Watson, Jason Coward, Guardian Paler, Jeremy Sebranek, Joy Burton, Dawn Crock, Michelle Mims, Natalie Lundquist, Anita Ford, and Darlene. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon.